question is, why did God? What did it take him so long to do it? God could have done it in one. So this question is actually is a good question. Once again, you asked another great question, and it's the same question brought down in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, and it says, of course, God could have done it in a different way, but God did it in a specific way and gives their reasons. At the end of Pirkei Avot, it says that there were 10 times God says there shall be this, 10 statements, and the 10 statements there's a reason why He did it in that specific way. For example, just off the top of my head. It's what was the last thing to be created? Last thing to be created, man. And in the Midrash, it says a lesson. It says, why was man created last? Well, first of all, it's 2 points. Number one, that he should come to the world the way it's ready. It's ready to be, because man is the focus of creation. It's for us. So first you prepare the background, and then you bring in the feature presentation. We're the feature presentation of the universe, and therefore everything's ready for us when we get here. That's one reason brought down in the Midrash. Another reason is that man may get haughty. Humans are the only creations that have a tendency to get haughty. No other creation to walk around with like bravado, braggadocious. Look at me! Look what I could do! I'm amazing! People have a tendency to do that. And that's a very bad thing. So the Midrash says is that if someone ever gets haughty, he should remember that the lowly fly, the lowly earthworm, all these lowly creatures, they were all here before you. They were all here before you. To remind yourself, to remind, like, it's like a lesson to sort of remind us of our insignificance in the grander scheme of things, and to try to help us lessen our ego. With regards, so yes, God indeed could have created everything like that in one instant, without any constraints of time. God could have, but He chose not to. With regards to God being tired, it doesn't say God was tired. It never says that, and it doesn't say that God rested. It says that God ceased to create. God ceased to create. Doesn't say He rested. He ceased to create. And if you hear, for example, Rabbi Berkowitz, who's my brother's and one of our teachers in Israel, and one of the spiritual leaders of Torch, if you ever hear him translate, 6 days God created, and what did He do on the seventh day? On the seventh, He ceased to create. He ceased to create. And there's deeper meanings behind this. The 6 days correspond to the 6,000 years, and the seventh day corresponds to 7,000 years, and that's the completion. There's lots and lots of Kabbalistic or ideas that go with the 6 and the 1. But nowhere does it say that God was tired, worked so hard. I need a rest. That's not the implication.
They were creations that came to being through utterances. So God spoke, and it was. So it wasn't a laborious task.
Right.
He just, said.
I'll tell you another point here. Once we're on the subject, this is probably the closest you'll ever get to hearing me say anything about relating to Kabbalah. But there's a theological problem of the coexistence of an infinite and a finite world. Where we live in a finite world, right? We live in an expanding universe. If it's expanding, it has limitations, and it's getting bigger, right? But it's getting bigger, but it has limitations. We live in a finite world. Everything that we see is finite. Our entire universe is finite. We're all finite. We have our limitations. We describe God as infinite. So how could there be room for finite if infinite, if these ideas contradict each other? How do you understand? How could there be anything besides for God? If God exists the way we describe Him to be exists, how could we exist if God exists? That's a deep philosophical problem that's discussed heavily. It's one of the problems that the Greeks had with a finite world, with an infinite and the finite. The way we describe it was this problem, and they invented an infinite world. They said, "Oh, the world's infinite. The world's infinite. You avoid the problem. There's only one thing. The world's been around forever. That was their solution to the problem. Once that's been debunked already, and like many other things that in the future will be debunked as well. That was debunked, and all of humanity, all the scientists, everyone finally agrees that the Torah is right. There was a beginning, right? We live in a finite world that's expanding. Everyone agrees to it. For thousands of years, everyone, till the 1950s, 1960s, when it was proven conclusively that we live in an expanding universe, all scientists believe. What do you mean? The world's been around forever. Finally, science has come around, and they accept the first word of the Torah to be true. Right? There was a beginning, and they'll come around to other things also. Lot, as we say. We don't push. But science has come around. What was my point with this? What's my point?
What's the explanation between the finite and...
Oh, yes. So we have a problem of infinite and finite. So that was their problem, and they had their solution. But now that we know we live in a finite universe, we believe in an infinite God, how could that be? So there's a term that you may hear if you learn Kabbalah, and that's the word called tzimtzum. Anyone heard that term? Mm-hmm. Tzimtzum means limitation. What it means, this problem extends, by the way. I want to this problem of finite and infinite coexisting is the same problem of, let's say, free will versus determinism. It's the same theory. How could we have something that's us but not God? And I can make decisions, and God has no say in the matter, but God knows. So those things are in conflict. It's the same exact point. How can we exist if God exists? How can we make decisions if God knows what we're going to decide? It's the same point. And the answer that's given, the Orthodox is called tzimtzum. What does tzimtzum mean? Tzimtzum means limiting. And it's I don't really understand the point because I never really learned it. But from what I understand is that God found a way to limit his infinity and make room for finiteness. Even though God knows what we're going to decide, God made it that we can choose whatever we want. How this works, it doesn't. We don't know. But God created the universe by limiting Himself. Tzimtzum. So how does God create? Think about it. How does God create? By not being Himself, by not working. That's how God creates. Correct? Does that make sense? If God just stayed as He always was, which is totally infinite, it's not possible for a finite world to exist. God limited Himself, curbed Himself, whatever that means. He curbed Himself a little bit and made room for finite. Does that make sense?
I don't know what problem with people being finite and God being...
Well, the problem is those things logically can't seem to go together. How could there be room for finite if the infinity exists? Well, I think it's the same question, like we said. It's how can we make decisions totally unrelated? How could there be something that's not God? How could there be room in the world where there's something which exists, which is outside of God's decision, control, so to speak? How could that be? Anyhow, so what they say is that what the Kabbalists say is that God limited Himself, God curbed Himself in, so to speak. So now, how does God create? God creates by limiting Himself. What we do on Shabbat is we live like God a little bit. Our Shabbat is to be a little bit like God. We know v'halachta b'drachav. We're told we have to be like God. God's infinite, right? We can't be infinite. But we have to act like God. What did God do when He created? He curbed. It means normally we think we're creating as external. We're building something else. God was the opposite. He limited Himself to a degree, and therefore there was room for finite. Therefore there's room for humanity. There was room for something that's not God. We are like God on Shabbat, where we say, we're not working. We're limiting ourselves. We're curbing ourselves. We're not doing things that we would normally do. That was the idea I wanted to throw out.
It's really good.